Hello, my friends. Welcome back to the dreamscape of history. Before we begin, if this journey into the obscure corners of the past resonates with you, consider subscribing, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I also love reading your comments, so please let me know where in the world you are and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. We begin our new collection of stories in a place of immense wealth and cultivated beauty. It is the mid-18th century. We are walking through the grounds of a vast English country estate. The grass is perfectly green, trimmed by sheep and scythes. The trees are arranged in clusters that look natural but were actually planted by a landscape architect with the precision of a general positioning troops. Everything here is designed to evoke a feeling, a specific mood. The aristocrats of the Georgian era were obsessed with the picturesque. They wanted their gardens to look like paintings come to life. They dug artificial lakes. They built fake Greek temples on the hills. They even constructed artificial ruins, crumbling stone towers that looked ancient but were built last Tuesday. But for some landowners, a stone tower was not enough. To truly capture the mood of ancient, melancholic wisdom, they needed something more. They needed a soul. They needed a person to inhabit the loneliness. And so they hired one. This is the story of the ornamental hermit. It sounds like a joke or a fairy tale, but it was a real profession, a real job that a person could apply for in the newspapers. Imagine the advertisement. Wanted a man to retire from the world for 7 years, must reside in the garden grotto, must not speak, must not cut hair or nails, food and water provided, £600 upon completion. It was a contract of solitude. The wealthy owner would build a hermitage, a small damp cave or a hut of roots and logs in the darkest, gloomiest corner of his garden, and then he would put a human being inside it. The hermit was not a spiritual seeker, he was a decoration, a garden gnome made of flesh and bone. His job was to sit there, to look sad, to look wise, and to add a touch of romantic gloom to the landscape. When the Lord and his guests went for a stroll after dinner, they would walk past the hermitage. They would peer into the shadows. "Look," the Lord might whisper, "there is our hermit, deep in contemplation." The guests would nod, feeling a pleasant shiver of melancholy. They would admire his long beard, his tattered robes, his hourglass and his skull, and then they would walk back to the manor house for port and cheese, leaving the man alone in the dark. But what was life actually like for the man in the cave? Let us look at the details of these contracts. They were surprisingly specific. The Honourable Charles Hamilton of Painchill Park had strict rules for his hermit. The man was to wear a camlet robe. He was never, under any circumstances, to cut his hair, his beard, or his fingernails. He was to become wild, a living part of the vegetation. He was forbidden to speak to the servants. He was forbidden to leave the boundaries of the estate. In exchange, he was given a Bible, a pair of optical glasses, a mat for sleeping, and a hassock for a pillow. Food was brought to him from the big house, but he was not allowed to dine with others. He had to eat alone, in silence. Some hermitages were equipped with a bell. If the hermit needed something, he could ring it, but mostly he was expected to be invisible until he was needed for the performance. Imagine the psychological toll. You are living in a damp cave in Surrey. It is raining. Your fingernails are curling over your fingertips. Your hair is matted. You have not spoken a word to another human being in months. You are essentially a prisoner, but the bars are made of rhododendrons and contract law. Why would anyone do this? Desperation, mostly. £600 was a fortune. It was enough to set a man up for life, to buy a farm, to open a business. It was a lottery ticket. All you had to do was endure 7 years of silence. But few could do it. The records tell us that Charles Hamilton's hermit lasted only 3 weeks. He was caught sneaking out to the local tavern for a pint of ale. He was fired on the spot. Others lasted longer. At Hawkston Park in Shropshire, the hermit was a local celebrity. He had a stiff arm, and he would sit at a table with a skull in front of him. Visitors would knock on the door. He would not answer. He would just stare at the skull, contemplating mortality, while the tourists giggled and peered through the window. It was a strange form of theatre. The audience knew he was hired. The hermit knew he was acting. But everyone pretended it was real. They wanted to believe that wisdom could be bought, that you could purchase a holy man, put him in your backyard, and somehow absorb his holiness by osmosis. There were different grades of hermits. If you couldn't afford a live one, or if you didn't want the hassle of feeding a man who might smell bad or complain about the damp, you could buy a substitute. Some gardens featured automatons, wooden hermits with clockwork mechanisms. They would nod their heads. They would move their hands across a book. They were quiet. They didn't eat. And they didn't sneak off to the pub. Others simply set up a hermitage, laid out a pair of glasses and an open book on a table, and left it empty. The implication was that the hermit had just stepped out, the invisible hermit. It allowed the guests to imagine the sage without having to look at his dirty fingernails. But the trend speaks to a deeper, stranger human need, the desire to own sadness, to curate isolation. The aristocrats of the 18th century lived lives of immense social obligation. Balls, dinners, parliament. They were never alone. Perhaps, by keeping a hermit in the garden, they were projecting a fantasy. They looked at the man in the cave, and they didn't see a poor wretch doing it for the money. They saw freedom. Freedom from wigs, freedom from corset lacing, freedom from small talk. Of course, the reality for the hermit was far less romantic. It was cold, it was boring, and it was deeply lonely. To be an object, a conversation piece, is a dehumanizing experience. You are not a person. You are a prop, a texture in the landscape, somewhere between a tree and a statue. By the 19th century, the fashion faded. The Industrial Revolution arrived. The world became louder, faster. The idea of paying a man to sit in a cave seemed ridiculous. The hermitages fell into ruin. The caves were reclaimed by ivy. The wooden automatons rotted away. But if you walk through the great estates of England today, you can still find them. Small stone huts tucked away in the woods, empty now, but once a man sat there, listening to the rain, watching his nails grow, waiting for the sound of footsteps on the gravel path so he could strike a pose of sorrow for an audience he was not allowed to speak to. We leave the silent garden now. We leave the fake ruins and the paid loneliness. We travel across the Channel to a place where the display of the human body was not private, but public, very public. We are going to Paris, to a building that attracted more visitors than the Eiffel Tower,
But the attraction inside wasn't art, it was death.
We leave the quiet, rain-soaked gardens of the English aristocracy, and we travel to the bustling, gaslit streets of 19th century Paris. It is the era of the flaneur, the stroller, the observer of city life. The boulevards are filled with carriages, the cafes are filled with artists, the air smells of roasting chestnuts, tobacco, and the faint damp scent of the River Seine. Paris is the capital of entertainment. You can go to the opera, you can go to the Louvre, you can watch the can-can dancers at the Moulin Rouge. But there is another attraction, one that is free, one that is open 7 days a week from dawn until dusk, and it is more popular than all the theatres combined. We walk towards the Ile de la Cité, the island in the heart of the city. We pass the looming towers of Notre Dame Cathedral, and just behind it, at the very tip of the island, stands a low, unassuming building. It looks almost like a Greek temple, modest and respectable, but the crowd outside suggests otherwise. There is a line, a long line. It is a mix of everyone in Paris. There are working-class men in flat caps. There are nursemaids pushing prams. There are wealthy women in silk dresses holding parasols. There are children eating apples. They are chatting, laughing, jostling for position. They are waiting to see the show. But the actors inside are not alive. This is the Paris Morgue, the salle d'exposition, the exhibition room. In the modern world, the morgue is a private place, a clinical place, hidden away in the basement of a hospital. Access is restricted to doctors, police, and grieving relatives. But in Victorian Paris, the morgue was a public storefront. It was designed, intentionally, as a window shopping experience for death. You step in. The air changes instantly. It is cooler here, damp. The smell of the street is replaced by the smell of chlorine and cold stone. You move with the shuffling line towards a massive glass partition, a wall of windows that separate the living from the dead. Behind the glass, there are 2 rows of black marble slabs, and on the slabs lie the bodies. They are naked save for a loincloth or a strategically placed towel. Their clothes, the wet coats, the torn dresses, the boots, are hung on pegs above them, swinging slightly in the draught. These are the unknown, the anonymous dead found in the river or on the streets or in the alleyways of the city. The official purpose of this display is identification. The police hope that someone in the crowd will recognize a face, a scar, or a coat, and give the poor soul a name. But the authorities know the truth of the thousands of people who file past the glass every day. Perhaps a handful are there to identify a loved one. The rest, they are there for the thrill.
You press your face against the cold glass. The condensation from your breath fogs the view for a second. You wipe it away. Inside the chamber, it is a scene of eerie, frozen stillness. To keep the bodies from decomposing too quickly in the days before refrigeration, a constant stream of cold water trickles over them. It drips from taps above the slabs. Drip, drip, drip. The water runs over the pale skin, making it glisten. It looks, strangely, like they are sweating or crying. The bodies are swollen. Many have been pulled from the Seine. The drowned have a specific look, bloated, discoloured. But the Parisians do not look away. They stare. They point. Look at that one, a man whispers to his wife. A hole in the chest, a duel perhaps, or a crime of passion, she replies, adjusting her hat. They invent stories. They project dramas onto the silent flesh. That young woman with the bruise on her cheek, surely a tragic actress who lost her love. That old man with the calloused hands, a ruined gambler. The morgue was the theatre of the real. Unlike the plays on the boulevard, here the tragedy was absolute. The blood was real. The end was final. The guidebooks of the time actually listed the morgue as a must-see attraction. Le Morgue, one guide wrote, is the only free theatre in Paris. On days when a particularly sensational body was brought in, a victim of a famous murder, or a beautiful young woman cut down in her prime, the crowds would swell to riotous proportions. 40,000 people might visit in a single day. The street vendors outside would make a fortune. They sold morgue special pastries, gingerbread in the shape of coffins, oranges, toys for the bored children waiting in line. It was a carnival of mortality. There was a strange intimacy to it. The glass was the only barrier. You were inches away from a person who, hours ago, was walking the same streets as you, breathing the same air. It was a confrontation with your own fragility, but filtered through the safety of the glass, it became a spectacle. The morgue fever gripped the city. If a fresh body arrived during visiting hours, the head attendant would pull a green curtain across the glass. The crowd would groan in disappointment or buzz with anticipation. What is coming? Is it the missing banker? Is it the girl from the news? When the curtains swept back, revealing the new arrival, there was a collective gasp, a moment of pure, morbid electricity.
But who were these people? The unknowns. Most were the poor, the suicides, the victims of a city that was growing too fast, leaving too many behind. They were put on display like cuts of meat in a butcher's shop, stripped of their privacy in death, just as they had been stripped of their dignity in life. And yet, in a twisted way, the morgue gave them a moment of fame. For 3 days, they were the center of attention. The whole city looked at them, speculated about them, cared about them, if only as a curiosity. Take the story of l'Inconnue de la Seine, the unknown woman of the Seine. A young woman pulled from the river in the late 19th century. She was, according to the legend, so beautiful, with such a peaceful, enigmatic smile, that the pathologist couldn't bear to bury her without a record. He made a death mask, a plastic cast of her face. That face, the face of a dead girl from the Paris Morgue, became the most famous face in Europe. Copies of the mask were sold in souvenir shops. Artists hung it in their studios. Poets wrote about her smile. She became a beauty icon, a silent muse. Decades later, when the first CPR mannequin was invented, the toy doll used to teach rescue breathing, the face they chose for it was hers. Resusci Anne, the most kissed face in history, belongs to an anonymous corpse from the Paris Morgue. Eventually, the moral tide turned. By the early 20th century, the idea of gawking at the dead began to feel barbaric. It felt less like civic duty and more like voyeurism. The theatre of death was criticized by reformers who argued that the dead deserved rest, not an audience. In 1907, the decree was signed. The curtains were drawn permanently. The public was banned. The glass windows were painted over or removed. The morgue went back to being a place of science and silence. But for nearly a century, death in Paris was a spectator sport. We step away from the glass. We leave the trickling water and the staring crowds behind. We move from the public display of the body to the private invasion of the home. We travel from Paris to London, to the most secure building in the British Empire, Buckingham Palace. You might think that the Queen is safe behind her high walls and her guards, but in the Victorian era, the walls had ears, and the throne room had a visitor who wasn't invited. A visitor who didn't want to steal the crown jewels, he just wanted to sit.
We leave the cold glass of the Paris Morgue and cross the Channel to London. We are standing before the gates of Buckingham Palace. It is 1838. Queen Victoria has just ascended the throne. She is young, 18 years old, and she is the most powerful woman in the world. Her palace is a fortress, or at least it is supposed to be. There are guards in red coats standing at the gates. There are high walls. There are hundreds of servants, footmen, and courtiers patrolling the corridors. It is the heart of the empire, a place of absolute security. But security is an illusion. Imagine it is 3 in the morning. The palace is silent. The gas lamps in the hallways are turned down low. The Queen is asleep in her bedchamber. The heavy velvet curtains are drawn. The world outside is locked away. But in the marble hall, a shadow moves. It is not a guard. It is not a ghost. It is a boy. He is small, wiry, and incredibly dirty. His clothes are greasy rags. He is barefoot. He moves across the expensive carpets without making a sound. He stops to look at a painting. He runs his hand along a gilded table. He is not afraid. In fact, he feels right at home. This is Edward Jones. The newspapers will later call him the Boy Jones. He is 14 years old, and he has been living inside Buckingham Palace for days, maybe weeks. He did not break down a door. He did not dig a tunnel. He simply walked in. The palace, for all its grandeur, was a logistical mess. Doors were left unlocked. Windows were left open to let in the air. The boy Jones found an open window on the ground floor, squeezed through, and vanished into the labyrinth of the royal household. He did not want to kill the Queen. He did not want to start a revolution. He just wanted to see. He was the ultimate stalker, a phantom fan who wanted to inhabit the life of his idol. When the porter finally caught him, hiding behind a piece of furniture in the marble hall, Jones didn't fight. He was covered in soot. He smelled terrible, but his pockets were full of strange treasures. Not gold, not diamonds. He had a pot of bear's grease, a pomade used for hair. He had a sword, and, most disturbingly, he had a pair of the Queen's underwear. He had stolen them from her private wardrobe. He had been in her room. He had been close enough to touch her clothes, her hairbrush, her life.
The discovery sent a shockwave through the nation. It was terrifying. If a dirty, unarmed teenager could get that close to the Queen, what could an assassin do? But the terrifying part wasn't just that he got in. It was what he did while he was there. Jones treated the palace like his own personal hotel. He confessed later that he spent his days hiding in the chimneys. Buckingham Palace has hundreds of chimneys. He would climb up into the flue, wedging himself into the dark, soot-filled brickwork, and wait. He would listen to the conversations of the servants. He would listen to the Queen meeting with her ministers. He was the ghost in the walls, the unseen ear. At night, when the palace slept, he came out to play. He went to the royal kitchen. He ate the leftovers from the Queen's dinner. He drank the wine left in the decanters. He even admitted, with a strange sort of pride, that he had sat on the throne. Imagine the image. A muddy, soot-stained street urchin sitting on the velvet throne of the British Empire, alone in the dark, pretending to be king. It is absurd, but it is also deeply unsettling. It speaks to the fragility of power. All the guards, all the gold, all the ceremony couldn't stop a boy who simply refused to follow the rules. He claimed he had even been in the Queen's bedroom while she slept. He had listened to her breathing. He said he liked the palace because it was warm and comfortable. For a boy from the slums of London, the palace wasn't a symbol of state, it was just a really nice house with free food. He was put on trial. But here was the problem. He hadn't actually broken anything. He hadn't hurt anyone. He stole some underwear and some hair grease. It was petty theft. The jury treated it almost as a joke. He was acquitted. But Jones wasn't done. The palace was his obsession. A year later, he came back. He climbed the wall. He squeezed through a window. This time, he was caught almost immediately. He was hiding under a sofa in the room next to the Queen's bedroom. He had been there for hours, listening to her talk to her husband, Prince Albert. Prince Albert was horrified. The Queen was terrified. She wrote in her diary about the fear of the boy Jones. He was no longer a funny story. He was a recurring nightmare, a shadow that kept returning to the foot of the bed.
They sent him to prison, the Tothill Fields Bridewell, a harsh place. They put him on the treadmill, the very machine we spoke of earlier. They forced him to walk the endless stairs in silence. They hoped the hard labour would break his obsession. It didn't. As soon as he was released, he went back. A third time. He was caught again. The authorities were at their wits' end. They couldn't execute him for stealing linen. They couldn't lock him up forever for trespassing. He was a nuisance, but a nuisance who knew the layout of the Queen's bedroom better than the Prime Minister did. Finally, the government decided to make him disappear. Not by killing him, but by shipping him away. They offered him a position on a ship. He was essentially kidnapped by the state and sent to sea. He travelled to Brazil. He travelled to Australia. He spent the rest of his life in exile. He became the town crier in Perth, and later a pie seller in Melbourne. A strange, lonely end for the boy who once sat on the throne of England. He died in 1893, falling off a bridge while drunk. He died anonymously, but his legacy lingered in the palace walls. After Jones, security changed. The palace was locked down. The invisibility of the royal family ended. But the story of the boy Jones taps into a primal fear, the fear of the intruder. We lock our doors at night. We check the windows. We believe our home is a sanctuary. But Jones proved that walls are just bricks. Locks are just metal. If someone wants to get in, if they are patient enough, quiet enough, and small enough, they will get in. It makes you wonder, as you lie in your bed tonight, listening to the creaks of your own house, is that sound just the wind? Is it the house settling? Or is it a shadow moving in the hallway? Someone who just wants to sit in your chair, eat your food and watch you sleep. We leave the boy Jones to his lonely exile in Australia. We leave the velvet throne and the soot-stained chimneys. We turn our attention from the invasion of privacy to the invasion of the skin itself. We are going to a library, a quiet, dignified library filled with leather-bound books. But the leather on these books did not come from a cow. It came from the patients.
We leave the soot-stained chimneys of Buckingham Palace and the lonely obsession of the boy Jones. We seek a place that is quieter, more refined, a place of study and contemplation. We are standing in a private library in the 19th century. It is a beautiful room. The walls are lined from floor to ceiling with mahogany shelves. A fire crackles in the hearth, casting a warm orange glow on the spines of thousands of books. The air smells of vanilla, almond, and old paper, the smell of decomposing lignin, the smell of history. You walk to a shelf. You run your finger along the bindings. Most are calfskin, smooth, polished, smelling of wax. Some are Morocco leather, made from goatskin, with a distinct grain. You pull down a small, unassuming volume. It is a medical text, or perhaps a transcript of a famous trial. The leather feels strange under your fingertips. It is softer than cowhide, almost velvety, but it has a slightly different texture. The paws are visible, triangular, and arranged in a pattern that looks vaguely familiar. You open the cover. There is an inscription inside, written in elegant copperplate handwriting, bound in the skin of the author. You drop the book. This is anthropodermic bibliopegy, the practice of binding books in human skin. It sounds like the work of a monster in a horror movie, a serial killer making trophies, but the truth is far more disturbing. This was not the work of madmen hiding in basements. It was the work of doctors, judges, gentlemen scholars. In the 18th and 19th centuries, this practice was a quiet, accepted curiosity among the elite. It was the ultimate collector's item, a way to merge the physical body with the intellectual work. Imagine the mindset required to do this. A doctor performs an autopsy on a patient who has died in the hospital. Perhaps it is a woman who died of a rare disease or an unclaimed body from the poorhouse. The doctor removes the skin. He tans it. He treats it with sumac and lime, and then he hands it to a bookbinder with a specific request. Bind my anatomy textbook in this. It was seen as a tribute, a way to immortalize the subject, but it was also an act of supreme ownership. The doctor didn't just study the patient, he consumed them. He turned them into an object to sit on his shelf, to be stroked and read and admired by his friends over brandy and cigars.
One of the most famous examples comes from the story of the Red Barn murder. In 1827, a man named William Corder murdered his lover, Maria Martin. It was a sensational crime. The public was obsessed with it. Corder was caught. He was tried. He was hanged. But his punishment didn't end at the gallows. His body was given to the surgeons for dissection, a standard practice for murderers. But the surgeon, a man named George Creed, went further. He took a piece of Corder's skin. He tanned it, and he used it to bind a copy of the legendary account of the murder. The book sits in a museum in Suffolk today. It looks like dark, coarse leather. On the cover, stamped in gold, is the title. And inside, written in ink, is a note confirming the origin of the binding. This was judicial binding. The idea that a criminal should be wrapped in his own crime forever. It was a final layer of punishment. Corder took a life, so his body was taken from him. He became a vessel for the story of his own wickedness. But not all skin books were punishments. Some were, surprisingly,
acts of twisted romance. There are accounts of erotica or poetry bound in the skin of a lover. Or, in one case, a woman who asked for her skin to be used to bind a volume of her own life story, to be given to the man she loved but could not marry. It transforms the book into a relic, a ghost. When you hold it, you are holding a person. You are touching their skin. The barrier between the reader and the subject dissolves. It is intimate. It is grotesque. And to the Victorian mind, it was fascinating. The skin itself, once tanned, is surprisingly durable. It does not rot. It does not smell. It looks, for the most part, like pigskin. Unless you know what to look for, you might never know. And that is the quiet horror of the library. How many books are sitting on shelves right now in universities, in private collections, or in antique shops that are wearing a human face?
In recent years, modern science has started to investigate. Librarians and chemists are taking samples from suspicious books. They use a technique called peptide mass fingerprinting. They analyze the collagen in the leather. Is it cow? Is it sheep? Is it goat? Or is it primate? Harvard University discovered one in their collection, a book called Des Destinées de l'âme, Destinies of the Soul. It is a meditation on the human spirit. The author gave it to a doctor friend. The doctor, a man named Ludovic Boulon, bound it in the skin of an unclaimed female patient who had died of a stroke. He inserted a note. A book about the human soul deserves to have a human covering. He thought he was being poetic. He thought he was elevating the text. For decades, students handled that book. They checked it out. They read it. They touched the skin of the anonymous woman. They didn't know. In 2024, Harvard finally removed the binding. They acknowledged that the stewardship of human remains required dignity, not display. The skin was laid to rest. The book was rebound. But the history remains. It forces us to ask uncomfortable questions about the past. We think of books as sacred objects, vessels of knowledge. But in the era of anthropodermic bibliopagy, the book became a predator. It swallowed the human. The library is quiet. The fire has died down to embers. The shadows are long. You look at the rows of books on the wall, thousands of spines, red, brown, black. They all look the same in the dim light. You reach out to take another one, but you hesitate. You pull your hand back. Suddenly, the leather doesn't look like leather anymore. It looks like flesh. It looks like silence waiting to scream. We leave the library. We leave the books that breathe. We step out into the fog of the city. But we are not going to the clean, paved streets. We are going to the darkest, dirtiest corners of the Victorian slums. We are going to meet the people who made their living from the things we throw away. We are going to meet the pure finders. And what they were looking for, you will wish you didn't know.
We leave the scented air of the library and the smooth, strange leather of the books. We step out into a world that is far less refined. The London fog is thick tonight, a pea super. It swirls around the gas lamps, turning the light into sickly yellow pools. The air tastes of coal smoke and the damp rot of the River Thames. We are walking through the streets of Bermondsey, the leather capital of the Victorian world. This is where the hides are tanned, where the skins of cows and sheep and goats are turned into the belts, the shoes and the bookbindings of the empire. But to make leather soft, to make it pliable and expensive, you need chemicals. You need an
alkaline solution to strip the flesh and the hair from the hide. In the modern world, we have factories. In the Victorian world, they had pure. The word sounds innocent, clean, holy even. But in the slang of the London poor, pure meant only one thing: dog dung. And the people we see moving through the fog, hunched over, staring intently at the cobblestones, they are the pure finders. It is a profession of the desperate. Usually they are older women or men too broken for heavy labor. They wear layers of tattered rags to keep out the chill. They carry a bucket or a covered basket, and they walk miles and miles every day, scanning the gutter, searching for the white, chalky deposit of a dog that has eaten bones. This was the white gold. Imagine the work. You are walking through the filthiest city on earth. You are looking for waste amidst the waste. When you find it, you have a choice. If you are lucky, you have a glove. A leather glove, ironically made by the very process you are fueling. But many pure finders could not afford a glove. So they used their bare hands. They pick it up, they toss it in the bucket, they keep walking. It is a job of infinite repetition, infinite humility. To survive, you must touch what everyone else avoids. You must become invisible. The ladies and gentlemen walking their poodles step around you, wrinkling their noses. They do not realize that you are waiting for their pets to make a deposit. You are the shadow economy of the street.
The economics of pure were surprisingly complex. There was a market, a hierarchy. The tanneries of Bermondsey paid well for the best product. There was dry pure and wet pure. The dry stuff, found on the streets, was cleaner to handle, but the wet stuff, often mixed with the mud of the road, was heavier. And since the tanners paid by the bucket, some finders were not above cheating. They would mix in mortar or lime or just plain mud to bulk up their haul. But the tanners knew. They would thrust their own hands into the bucket, feeling the texture, testing the quality. It was a negotiation conducted in filth. The pure finders were a distinct tribe in the London underworld. Henry Mayhew, the famous chronicler of the Victorian poor, interviewed them. He found that they were not despairing, they were practical. A bucket of pure could earn them 8 pence or a shilling. That was enough for a bed in a lodging house, a loaf of bread, and a bottle of gin to wash away the taste of the day. They knew the dogs of London. They knew which neighbourhoods had the well-fed strays. Some finders even struck deals with kennel owners. They would clean the kennels for free in exchange for keeping the pure. It was a monopoly on manure. And the reason for this demand? The chemistry. Dog dung contains enzymes that break down the fibrous structure of collagen in the skin. This process is called baiting. The hides were soaked in a mixture of water and dung. The enzymes made the leather soft, flexible and silky. So picture the fine Victorian lady pulling on her delicate kid gloves. Picture the gentleman sitting in his leather armchair reading his leather-bound book. They are surrounded by luxury, by the smell of expensive polish. But that luxury began in a bucket carried by an old woman with bare hands trudging through the fog of 7 dials. The beauty was born from the beast.
The pure finders lived a life of strange duality. They were essential to the industrial might of the empire. Without them, the army would have no boots. The factories would have no drive belts. Yet they were the lowest of the low, the untouchables. But as the 19th century drew to a close,
The trade began to vanish, not because of dignity, but because of chemistry. Scientists figured out how to replicate the enzymes in a lab. Artificial baits were created. They were cleaner, more consistent, and they didn't require an army of women scouring the streets. The pure finders disappeared into the fog. Their buckets were emptied for the last time. The stray dogs of London were safe from their prying eyes. But the image lingers. It is a reminder of the hidden costs of civilization. Every luxury we have rests on a foundation of dirty work. Someone has to clean the sewers. Someone has to sort the recycling. Someone has to find the pure. We look at the leather shoes by the door. We see the shine. But now we also see the shadow. We smell the faint, ghostly scent of the tannery pits. We leave the foggy streets of Bermondsey. We leave the buckets and the tanners. We travel out of the city now, to the open road, to the lonely crossroads where criminals were sent not just to die, but to hang forever. We are going to visit the gibbet, the iron cage, the bird's nest made of human bones, a warning that creaks in the wind long after the crime has been forgotten. We leave the crowded, foggy streets of London and the women searching the gutters. We travel out into the open country, to a lonely crossroads on a heath. The wind blows harder here. It whistles through the gorse bushes. The sky is vast and empty. But there is a sound that defines the English landscape of the 18th century just as much as the church bell or the shepherd's whistle. Creak, creak, creak. It is the sound of metal grinding against metal, rhythmic, slow, relentless. You look up. Silhouetted against the grey sky, hanging from a tall wooden post, is a cage. It is shaped like a man. It is made of iron bands, riveted together to form a crude skeleton, and inside the iron skeleton is a real one. This is the gibbet. We often confuse gibbeting with hanging, but they are different. Hanging is the method of death. Gibbeting is what happens after. It is a punishment beyond the grave, a way to say that death is not the end of your sentence. The man in the cage was likely a highwayman or a pirate or a murderer. He was executed days ago in the town square, but while other criminals were cut down and given to the surgeons or buried, he was ordered to be hung in chains. It was the ultimate warning, the king's terror. The preparation for the gibbet was a grim industrial process. Before the body was placed in the cage, it was treated. If the goal was to create a long-lasting monument, you couldn't let the body rot too quickly. So they coated it. They dipped the corpse in tar, in pitch, in tallow. They painted the dead man black. It sealed the skin. It protected the flesh from the birds and the weather. It turned him into a statue of preserved decay. The blacksmith had to measure the body beforehand. He had to forge the iron straps to fit the legs, the torso, the arms. It was a bespoke suit of iron made for a client who could not stand still for the fitting. Once encased, the cage was hoisted up, 20, sometimes 30 feet in the air, high enough to be seen for miles, high enough that no one could cut him down without a ladder. And there he stayed, swinging in the wind, a dark pendulum marking the passage of time.
The gibbet was designed to be a landmark, and it became one. In a world without GPS, without road signs, the dead became waypoints. Turn left at the old oak, a traveller might say.
Then go straight until you see Turning Tom. People lived in the shadow of these cages. Imagine living in a farmhouse nearby. Every time you opened your window, you saw him. Every time the wind changed, the smell of tar and corruption would drift into your kitchen. But humans are adaptable. We get used to horror. The gibbet became part of the scenery. It became a tourist attraction. On Sundays, families would walk out to the crossroads to visit the criminal. They would picnic beneath the rotting feet. They would stare up at the tarred face, trying to recognize the features of the notorious villain they had read about in the Newgate calendar. But nature, as always, is the final conqueror. The tar could only protect the body for so long. The birds came. Crows, ravens. They built nests in the hollow of the rib cage. They perched on the iron shoulders. The gibbet became a bird feeder. Slowly, over years, the flesh fell away. The bones bleached white in the sun, contrasting with the black iron. Pieces would drop off, a finger here, a jawbone there. And this is where the folklore begins. The gibbet was a place of fear, but also of magic, the hand of glory, the belief that the hand of a hanged man could unlock any door or cure any disease. People would sneak out at night. They would climb the post. They would steal a piece of the rope or a splinter of the wood or a tooth. They would rub the dead man's hand on a tumor to cure it. The gibbet was a pharmacy of the macabre. It creates a strange image, a mother lifting her sick child up to touch the cold, tarred foot of a murderer, hoping for a miracle. It shows how desperation and superstition intertwine. The thing that terrified them was also the thing that might save them.
Some of these bodies hung for decades. There are records of gibbets standing for 20, 30, 40 years. The iron lasted longer than the wood of the post. The post would rot and fall, bringing the cage crashing down into the grass. But even then, the punishment wasn't over. The iron cage with the scattered bones inside would be left there, absorbed by the earth. The grass would grow through the ribs. The wildflowers would bloom around the skull. Eventually, the bloody code ended. The laws became civilized. In 1832, the last men were gibbeted in England. The practice was abolished. The posts were cut down. But the memory lingered. There are still places in the English countryside named Gibbet Hill or Caxton Gibbet. You drive past them today in your car. You see a green hill, a pub, or a bus stop. You do not see the shadow of the cage. You do not hear the creak. But for a century, that sound was the soundtrack of the rural night. A reminder that the law was watching. A reminder that your body belonged to the king, even after your soul had fled. The wind dies down. The creaking stops. The cage is still. We leave the lonely crossroads. We leave the tar and the iron. We travel from the external poison of the gibbet to an internal one. We are going to the mountains of Austria, to the Styrian Alps. Here, the peasants are known for their glowing skin, their boundless energy, their ability to climb steep peaks without losing their breath. They look like the picture of health, but their secret is in their breakfast. They are not eating oatmeal, they are eating arsenic, and they are eating enough of it to kill a horse. We leave the creaking iron cages of the English crossroads and the dark tarred silhouettes of the dead. We travel south and up, high into the crisp, thin air of the Styrian Alps in Austria. It is the mid-19th century. The landscape here is breathtaking.
green valleys, snow-capped peaks, waterfalls crashing down from glaciers. The people who live here, the Styrian peasants, are famous for their vitality. They are robust, strong. Their cheeks are rosy with health. Their eyes sparkle. They can climb the steepest mountain paths without getting winded. To the outside observer, they look like the perfect specimens of humanity. But if you were to sit down to breakfast with one of them, you would see a ritual that defies all medical logic. The woodcutter sits at his table. He takes a piece of bread, or perhaps a slice of bacon, and then he reaches for a small leather pouch. He takes out a pinch of white, crystalline powder. It looks like sugar or salt. He sprinkles it over his food, and he eats it. The powder is arsenic trioxide, a lethal poison, the king of poisons, a substance that has toppled dynasties, murdered popes, and silenced witnesses for centuries. A dose the size of a pea is enough to kill a healthy man in agonizing pain. But the woodcutter does not die. He does not vomit. He does not convulse. He finishes his meal, wipes his mouth, and goes out to chop trees with renewed energy. This is the strange and secret world of toxicomany, the arsenic eaters of Styria. For generations, the people of this region cultivated an immunity to death. They started young. A teenager would begin with a tiny dose, a grain the size of a pinhead. They would take it once a week, perhaps with the new moon. They would feel a little sick, a little feverish, but they would persist. Over months and years, they would increase the dose, slowly, carefully, until they were consuming amounts that would kill an ordinary person instantly. There are records of men eating 4 or 5 grains of pure arsenic a day, enough to kill a room full of people. They didn't just survive it, they thrived on it. To them, arsenic was not a poison. It was a tonic, a hydrutch, a giver of life.
But why? Why would anyone voluntarily eat the chemical equivalent of a loaded gun? Vanity and vitality. In the high altitude of the Alps, oxygen is thinner. Breathing is harder. The peasants discovered, through trial and deadly error, that arsenic affects the respiratory system. It allows the red blood cells to carry oxygen more efficiently, at least for a while. It opened up the airways. It gave them wind. A man on arsenic could hike up a mountain carrying a heavy load and feel as light as a feather. And then there was the beauty. Arsenic affects the capillaries, the tiny blood vessels under the skin. It causes them to dilate, to flush. It kills the bacteria that cause pimples. So, the arsenic eater had a glowing, flawless complexion. Their skin was milky white, with a perfect rosy blush on the cheeks. They looked like porcelain dolls. They looked, surprisingly, like the romantic ideal of health. It also increased the libido. It was an aphrodisiac, a beauty product, a performance enhancer. It was the miracle drug of the 19th century. But it was a deal with the devil. Once you started, you could not stop. The body became dependent on the poison. If an eater missed a dose, the withdrawal was horrific. Anxiety, vomiting, spasms, a feeling of impending doom. They were chained to the white powder. They were toxicomanes, addicts of death. The medical world didn't believe it. When travelers returned to London or Vienna, telling stories of peasants eating poison like candy, the doctors laughed. Impossible, they said. Arsenic accumulates. It kills. But in 1875,
2 peasant men from Styria were brought to a scientific conference. In front of a room full of skeptical experts, they sat down and ate a lethal dose of arsenic. The doctors waited for them to die. They didn't. The men just smiled and asked for a glass of schnapps. It proved that the human body is capable of terrifying adaptation. We can get used to almost anything, even our own destruction.
But there was a final, darker side effect, one that only became apparent at the very end. Arsenic is a preservative. It stops decay. It kills the bacteria that cause rot. We use it in taxidermy to preserve animal skins. The arsenic eaters were essentially taxidermying themselves while they were still alive. When they died, often of sudden heart failure or organ collapse, they did not decompose like normal men. Stories spread of grave diggers opening tombs in Styria 10 or 12 years after a burial. They would find the bodies perfectly intact. No rot, no smell, just the woodcutter lying in his coffin, looking as fresh and rosy as the day he died. The worms would not touch him. The earth would not take him back. He had become a statue of flesh, preserved by the very thing that he thought gave him life. It is a chilling thought to be so toxic, so saturated with poison, that even death cannot break you down. The practice eventually died out. Modern medicine and the laws restricting the sale of poisons put an end to the hedruck. But the legacy remains in our language. We still use the word tonic for something that gives us a boost. We still obsess over cleanses and supplements that promise to make us stronger, faster, more beautiful. We are not so different from the Styrian peasants. We just have different powders. We leave the valleys and the rosy-cheeked ghosts of the Alps. We travel from the chemical manipulation of the brain to the physical one. We go back in time to the very dawn of history, to a cave where a shaman is holding a sharp stone. He is not going to poison his patient. He is going to open him up. He is going to perform the oldest surgery known to man. He is going to drill a hole directly into the skull. And the terrifying part, the patient is awake. We leave the clean, cold air of the Austrian Alps and the strange resilience of the arsenic eaters. We travel back, far back, before the invention of the steam engine, before the printing press, before Rome, before written history itself. We are in a cave, or perhaps a simple mud hut. The firelight flickers against the stone walls. A person sits on the ground. They are holding their head in their hands, rocking back and forth. The pain is blinding, a migraine that has lasted for weeks, or perhaps the aftermath of a blow from a club. Or maybe they hear voices, spirits whispering in the darkness of their mind. The healer approaches. He does not have pills, he does not have potions. He has a stone, a piece of flint or obsidian, napped to a razor-sharp edge. He believes he knows what is wrong. The skull is a cage, and the demon inside wants out. He is about to perform trepanation. It is the oldest surgical procedure in human history. We have found skulls dating back 10,000 years in France, in Peru, in North Africa that bear the mark, the hole. Imagine the trust required, or the desperation. You are sitting there, fully conscious. There is no anesthesia, save perhaps for some fermented grain or a piece of wood to bite on.
The healer takes your head in his lap, he pushes back the hair, he exposes the skin, and then he begins to scrape. This is not a quick puncture. This is not a drill, not yet. In the Neolithic age, it is an abrasion. The healer uses the sharp stone to scrape away the scalp and then the bone itself, layer by layer. Scrape, scrape, scrape. The sound is deafening because it is happening inside your own head. The vibration travels through the skull, rattling the teeth, echoing in the ears. It is a sound of dry grinding, like stones rubbing together in a riverbed. It takes hours. The bone of the skull is thick. The diploe, the spongy layer between the outer and inner tables of the skull, must be breached. The healer works with a terrifying patience. He stops to blow away the bone dust. He wipes away the blood. He continues to scrape. He is looking for the dura mater, the membrane that protects the brain. He must expose it without piercing it. It is a surgery of millimeters. One slip and the patient dies, but he does not slip. He is a master of the stone. He is opening a window into the soul.
As the civilizations advanced, the tools changed. The stone scraper gave way to the metal saw, the trepine. In Roman times and later in the Middle Ages, the surgeon used a tool that looked like a corkscrew with a jagged crown at the end, a circular saw turned by hand. He would place the spike in the center of the forehead or the temple and begin to twist. Grind, twist, grind. The pressure is immense. You can feel the weight of the surgeon's hand bearing down on your skull. You can hear the teeth of the saw biting into the bone. The smell of friction, of burning bone fills your nose. It smells like a dentist's drill, but multiplied. Why did they do it? The reasons shifted with the centuries. In the ancient world, it was spiritual, to let out the bad air, to release the pneuma, to exorcise the demon of epilepsy. In the medieval world, it became more mechanical. It was used to treat skull fractures. If a knight was hit by a mace, the bone might be depressed, pressing on the brain. The surgeon would drill a hole to lift the shattered pieces, to relieve the pressure. But regardless of the reason, the experience was the same. A violation of the body's most secure fortress. The skull is meant to be sealed. It is the dark room where the self lives. To open it to the light while the person is still awake feels like a transgression against nature. And yet, here is the most shocking part. They survived. We know this because the skulls tell us. In museums around the world, there are trepanned skulls where the edges of the hole are smooth, rounded, healed. The bone tried to grow back. This means the patient lived for years, sometimes decades after the surgery. Some skulls have 3, 4, even 5 holes. 5 times a person sat down. 5 times they let someone drill into their head. Was it an addiction to the release? Did the relief of the pressure feel so good that they sought it out again? Or were they simply prone to getting hit in the head? Imagine walking around a medieval village with a flap of skin covering a hole in your skull. If you touched your forehead, you could feel the pulse of your own brain beating beneath the scalp, a soft spot, a permanent vulnerability. You are literally open-minded.
The practice never truly went away. It lingered in the backwaters of medicine. And in the 20th century, it saw a strange psychedelic revival. In the 1960s and 70s, a small group of people, influenced by theories of expanding consciousness, began to practice self-trepanation. Yes, doing it to themselves. They believed that the adult skull seals too tightly, cutting off the blood supply to the brain and suppressing the pulse of life. They wanted to return to the state of a child whose skull is still soft. They wanted to achieve a permanent high. There is a famous and gruesome account of a British woman in the 70s. She filmed herself. She sat in front of a mirror. She took an electric drill and she drilled a hole in her own forehead. She survived. She claimed she felt lighter, more peaceful. She claimed the brain blood volume had increased, restoring her lost vitality. It is a terrifying image. The modern seeker, alone in a bathroom, covered in blood, holding a power tool to their own head, chasing the same ghost that the Neolithic shaman chased with a stone. The desire to break out of the cage, the desire to let the light in. Most of us seek relief in a pill, in a nap, in a cup of tea. But there is a fringe of humanity that will always choose the drill. They believe that the pain is the price of enlightenment. We leave the buzzing of the electric drill and the grinding of the flint. We leave the healed skulls in the museum cases. We move from the hole in the head to a liquid in a bottle. We are entering the roaring 20s, a time of jazz, optimism, and new science. A new element has been discovered, radium. It glows in the dark. It feels warm. It seems to be pure energy. And the doctors of the era have a brilliant idea. If it glows, it must be good for you. Why not drink it? Why not bathe in it? Why not put it in our toothpaste? We are about to explore the era of radioactive quackery, a time when people paid a fortune to slowly dissolve their own bones, one glass of water at a time. We leave the dusty cave of the Stone Age surgeon and the sound of the drill. We step forward into a world that is bright, modern, electric. It is the 1920s, the Jazz Age, the era of possibility. Science has unlocked the secrets of the universe. Marie Curie has discovered radium. It is a miracle element. In the dark, it glows, a soft, pale blue luminescence. It feels warm to the touch. It seems to vibrate with an endless internal energy. And in a world obsessed with vitality, with speed, with youth, this energy is intoxicating. If radium can burn through cancer, surely, in small doses, it can burn through lethargy. Surely it can spark the tired human body back to life. Welcome to the era of radioactive quackery. Walk into a pharmacy in 1925, the shelves are lined with products that would make a modern physicist scream. There is Radithor, certified radioactive water. There is Doramad radioactive toothpaste for teeth that shine with new energy. There are radioactive chocolates, radioactive wool for babies, even radioactive suppositories. The marketing was relentless. Radium was marketed as liquid sunshine. It was the cure for everything: rheumatism, gout, high blood pressure, impotence. It was the ultimate tonic. Imagine the scene in a wealthy household. A man wakes up. He walks to his kitchen. On the counter sits a revogator. It looks like a standard ceramic water cooler, but the lining is made of uranium ore. He fills it with water before he sleeps. All night long, the uranium breaks down. It infuses the water with radon gas. In the morning, the water is charged.
He pours a glass. He drinks it. He believes he is drinking health. He believes he is drinking the very force of nature. He feels a tingle, a placebo effect, perhaps, or perhaps the buzz of mild radiation poisoning starting to tickle his nerves. "I feel great," he says. "I feel like a new man." He does not know that he is drinking a slow, patient assassin. Radium is chemically similar to calcium. The body, in its ignorance, mistakes the poison for a building block. It takes the radium from the water and it deposits it not in the waste, but in the bones. It builds the skeleton out of poison.
The tragedy of this era has a face. A handsome, wealthy, sporting face. Eben Byers. He was an American industrialist, a champion golfer, a man who had everything. But in 1927, he hurt his arm. He felt run down. His doctor, a man swept up in the craze, prescribed Radithor. It came in small, elegant bottles, distilled water laced with radium-226 and 228. It was expensive, a luxury drug. Byers tried it, and he loved it. He said he felt a toning up, a surge of vitality. He didn't just take the prescribed dose, he became an evangelist. He sent cases of it to his friends. He gave it to his horses. He drank 3 bottles a day for years. He consumed over 1,400 bottles of radioactive water. He was saturating himself. He was becoming, quite literally, a glowing example of health. But radiation is a thief. It steals time. Inside his body, the alpha particles were firing like microscopic bullets. They were shredding his DNA. They were killing the bone tissue from the inside out. For a long time, he felt fine. That is the horror of it. The latency period. The poison works in silence. It destroys the foundation while the house still looks perfect. Then, the headaches started. A tooth fell out, then another. His jaw began to ache, a deep, throbbing pain that aspirin couldn't touch. He went to the dentist. The dentist touched a loose tooth, and it came away with a piece of the jawbone attached. The bone wasn't just broken, it was necrotic. It was dead. His body was falling apart. By the time the authorities realized what was happening, it was too late. The Federal Trade Commission investigated the makers of Radithor. They asked Byers to testify, but he couldn't come to them. He was too weak to travel. A lawyer went to his mansion on Long Island. He found Byers in a dark room. He was 30 pounds lighter. He could hardly speak. His head was wrapped in bandages. The lawyer later wrote a chilling report. He said that Byers was young and mentally alert, but he could hardly speak. His whole upper jaw, excepting 2 front teeth and most of his lower jaw, had been removed. All the remaining bone tissue of his body was disintegrating, and holes were actually forming in his skull. The liquid sunshine had burned him alive.
Eben Byers died in 1932. The headline in the Wall Street Journal was brutal and unforgettable. The radium water worked fine until his jaw came off. His death ended the craze. The Reaver-Gators were thrown out. The radioactive toothpaste was pulled from the shelves. The world woke up from its glowing dream and realized it had been kissing a monster. But Eben Byers did not disappear. Not really. He was buried in a lead-lined coffin. Because his body was so radioactive, he was a hazard to the soil around him. 20 years later, scientists exhumed him to study the effects of radiation. He was still hot, still emitting alpha particles. He remains in his lead box today, a silent battery in the dark earth,
still glowing with the energy he paid a fortune to consume. It serves as a grim reminder we are always looking for the magic bullet, the superfood, the miracle cure. We want the shortcut to vitality. But sometimes the thing that makes us feel most alive is the thing that is killing us. We leave the lead-lined coffin of the industrialist, we leave the glowing watches and the buzzing laboratories of the modern age. We travel back one last time, to a simpler, quieter landscape. We are going to the countryside, to the moors. The mist is rising, the sun has set, and we are walking along a path that is not found on any modern map. It is a straight line cutting through the heather, a path that belongs to no man. It is the corpse road, the spirit path, the final journey that we all must take. And in the folklore of the past, you had to be very, very careful where you walked, because if you stepped off the path, the dead might just follow you home. We leave the buzzing radioactive laboratories of the 20th century, and we step back into the timeless landscape of the countryside. The air is cool here, clean. It smells of damp fern, heather, and the mineral scent of granite. We are standing on a high moorland in England, or perhaps the rugged hills of the Netherlands. It is twilight. The sun has dipped below the horizon, leaving a bruise of purple and indigo in the sky. The mist is beginning to rise from the hollows. You look down at the ground. There is a track running through the grass. It is not a paved road. It is not a modern highway. It is a faint, indented line in the earth, worn smooth by centuries of feet. But these feet only walked in one direction. This is a corpse road, a church way, a spirit path. In the medieval and early modern world, parishes were huge. A church might serve villages that were 5, 10, even 15 miles away. When someone died in a remote hamlet, they had to be carried to the consecrated ground of the churchyard for burial. But you couldn't just walk anywhere. You had to follow a specific route, a route sanctioned by tradition and by fear. The folklore of the time held a very specific belief. Spirits, ghosts, the wandering souls of the departed travel in straight lines. They cannot turn corners easily. They flow like a beam of light. And so, the corpse roads were often straight. They cut across fields. They went through rivers. They climbed over steep hills rather than going around them. To deviate from the path was dangerous. If the funeral procession stepped off the corpse road, the spirit of the dead might get confused. It might lose its way. It might detach from the coffin and wander the fields forever, haunting the living. Or worse, if you carried a body across a private field, the owner believed that the passage of the dead created a permanent right of way, that the land now belonged to the spirits. Landowners would lock their gates. They would dig ditches to stop the procession. It was a battle of geography and ghosts. The mourners, carrying the heavy wooden coffin on their shoulders, trudging through the mud, terrified of stepping one foot to the left or the right. They were walking a tightrope between this world and the next. The journey was long, grueling. The coffin was heavy. So the landscape adapted. Along these lonely tracks, you can still find them today. Coffin stones. They look like flat tables of rock or large boulders with a flat top. They were resting places, spots where the bearers could set the coffin down, wipe the sweat from their brows, and drink a ladle of ale or say a prayer. But even these stones were touched by the supernatural. It was believed that while the coffin rested on the stone, the spirit was momentarily released. It hovered there, watching. If a bird landed on the coffin, it was a sign. If the wind suddenly died, it was a sign. And at night, the locals avoided these roads at all costs. They spoke of corpse candles, mysterious balls of floating white, blue or yellow, that would bob along the path. We know this today as ignis fatuus, marsh gas igniting. But to them, it was a rehearsal, a spectral funeral procession practicing for the next death. The road usually ended at a specific gate, the Lich Gate, a roofed wooden structure at the entrance to the churchyard. The word lich comes from the Old English for corpse. This was the threshold, the border control of the afterlife. The coffin would be placed on the lich stone under the roof. The priest would meet it there. He would sprinkle holy water. He would say the first words of the service. Only then, cleansed and authorized, could the dead enter the village of the sleeping. It is a quiet, solemn geography, a map of grief laid over the land. These roads are mostly forgotten now. They are overgrown with brambles. They are crossed by motorways. But in the quiet places, where the modern world hasn't reached, the line is still there, a shadow in the grass, a memory of the thousands of feet that walked slowly, carrying the burden of mortality.
And so we have reached the end of our long journey. We have travelled far tonight. We started in the gilded, suffocating halls of Versailles, where luxury masked the scent of decay. We stood beside the king in his most private moments. We walked the foggy streets of London with the purefinders and climbed the endless stairs of the prison treadmill. We have seen the strange things we do to survive, eating arsenic in the Alps, drilling holes in our skulls to let the demons out, drinking radioactive water in search of eternal youth. We have seen how we cope with death, by freezing it in a photograph, by building bells to ring from the grave, by hiring a lonely man to eat our sins, and finally, by walking the long, straight road across the moors, carrying our loved ones home. The past is a cabinet of curiosities. It is dark. It is weird. It is sometimes horrifying, but it is also deeply human. Behind every strange ritual, every bizarre medicine, every grim job, there is a person just like you, trying to make sense of a world that is cold and hard and frightening. They did the best they could with the tools they had. They found warmth in the snow. They found dignity in the dirt. They found hope in the dark. As you lie here now, safely tucked away from the wind and the rain, let the stories fade. Let the images of the gibbet and the morgue dissolve into the mist. They are just echoes now, shadows on the wall. The fire is dying down. The candle is flickering out. The book is closed. Thank you for walking the spirit path with me tonight. I hope these stories have carried you far away from your own worries and left you ready for sleep. If you are still awake and you enjoyed this anthology of the macabre, please consider subscribing. There are many more stories hidden in the archives, waiting for the light. But for now, the journey is over. The road is empty. The silence is yours. Sleep well, my friends, and good night.